The barn was already burning when the shot rang out, not a warning shot, not a miss, a bullet meant for flesh. It found the boy instead of the woman, 16 years old, standing between armed men and a kitchen door at 2 in the morning, holding his arm, bleeding, not crying, behind him. A woman who'd been running for 2 years, who carried evidence that could destroy a St. Louis empire, who'd finally stopped running 3 weeks ago at a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere. In front of him, 3 shadows moving through smoke and firelight, sent by a man who'd never once in his life been told no. And in the doorway, a rancher with 30 days before the bank took everything, holding a rifle, making a choice between the money that could save his land and the woman who'd already saved his life. The fire roared. The boy fell. The choice was made. Some debts are paid in bullets. Some are paid in trust. This is the story of how a man who'd forgotten how to love learned it from a woman who'd forgotten how to stay, and how they both learned that the strongest thing you can build isn't a fence. It's a home worth defending. Caleb Mercer had 30 days before the bank took everything. 30 days to come up with $4,200 he didn't have. 30 days before Broken Creek Ranch. The land his father died trying to keep became someone else's problem. It was late August, the kind of heat that made men mean and cattle slow. The kind that pressed down on your shoulders like a physical weight and made you wonder why anyone had ever thought this land was worth fighting for. Caleb had made peace with losing it. What he hadn't made peace with was the woman standing in his yard. She had one suitcase beside her, canvas bag over her shoulder, dust on her boots that said she'd walked the last quarter mile from where the stage dropped her. The kind of dust you don't get from a carriage ride. Caleb stood in the doorway of his own ranch house, rifle resting across his forearm, not raised, not threatening, just there, the way a man holds a tool he knows how to use. He looked at the woman standing in the dirt 20 feet out. She wasn't what he expected. Not that he'd expected much. Roy had showed him the posting 2 weeks back. Experienced cook, fair wages, references available. The paper had been tacked to the board at the Millhaven station for 3 months. Caleb figured anyone desperate enough to answer a 3-month-old job posting for a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere was either running from something or too broken to run anymore. Looking at her now, he figured both. She was maybe 30, sharp-featured, dark hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. Her clothes were clean but plain, the kind of plain that comes from choosing the same thing every day, because thinking about it costs energy you don't have. And her eyes had already seen the worst the world could offer. He knew that look. He'd seen it in the mirror often enough. "Get off my land," Caleb said. He didn't raise his voice. He never had to. The woman didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't do any of the things people usually did when Caleb Mercer told them to leave. She just looked back at him. Steady, direct. "You posted a job, Mr. Mercer," she said. "I came to work." 6 words. That was all it took. 6 words delivered in a voice that had no plea in it, no negotiation. Just the plain fact of the matter stated by someone who'd stopped caring whether the world listened or not. Something about those 6 words stopped Caleb cold, because nobody had looked at him like that in years. Like they weren't afraid of him at all. Behind him he heard Roy Dalton's boots on the porch boards. Roy was 62 years old, wide as a doorframe, had worked Broken Creek for 20 years. Back when Caleb's father was still alive. Back when the ranch had a full crew and the cattle numbered closer to 200 than 40. Roy was one of exactly 3 people on Earth Caleb genuinely respected. The other 2 were dead. "That's her," Roy said quietly. "Not a question, I can see that. She walked from the main road, I noticed." In this heat, Caleb didn't respond. Roy stepped up beside him, looked out at the woman standing in the yard. "You gonna let her starve out there, or you gonna let her cook?" "I don't need the complication. You need someone who can make biscuits that don't come out like river stones," Roy said. Flat, matter of fact. You need someone who can keep 4 hungry cowboys from walking off because they're tired of eating whatever Sammy burns in a pan. We've had nobody in that kitchen since Martha left in October. Boys are eating hardtack and whatever Sammy can manage. We're losing men not because of the money. We're losing them because this place feels like hope came here to die. Caleb's jaw tightened. Sammy was 17 years old. Good with horses. Terrible with fire. For 3 months the kid had been trying to manage the kitchen because nobody else would. The results had been edible, barely. 2 men had left in the last month, not because of money. Because the ranch felt like a place where hope came to die, Roy's words. Not Caleb's, though Caleb hadn't argued. She listed rates, Roy continued. Reasonable ones. Lower than what you'd pay in town. Caleb looked at the woman again. She hadn't moved, hadn't called out, hadn't done anything except stand there and wait, like she'd waited before, in other places. For other men to make up their minds about whether she was worth the trouble. He hated that she had to do that. Hated more that he was making her do it now. If she can't handle the work, Caleb said slowly, she's gone in a week. Roy nodded once. Fair enough. Caleb stepped off the porch, walked across the yard, stopped 10 feet from the woman. Up close, she was smaller than she'd looked from the doorway. Maybe 5'6". Thin in the way people get thin when they've been moving too much and eating too little. But her hands weren't soft. They had the look of hands that had worked, Miss Brooks. He said. She blinked. Just once, Kane, she corrected. Nora Kane. He filed that away. The hesitation. The correction. A woman who'd used more than one name. You've cooked for working crews before, he said. Railroad crews. A mining camp outside Nevada. 2 years at a hotel dining kitchen in St. Louis. This isn't a hotel, I can see that. The men eat before sunrise and after dark. The kitchen schedule doesn't bend for weather, sickness, or bad moods. I need food on the table. Not conversation, she set her bag down. I'm not much for conversation either. Something in him shifted. Just slightly. Just enough that he noticed. He gestured toward the house. Roy'll show you where you sleep. You start tomorrow morning. 5 o'clock, I'll start tonight, she said. He stopped. Turned back. What? I'll start tonight, she repeated. Calm, even. What do you have in the supply room? He told her. She nodded once. Picked up her bag. Walked past him toward the house like she'd been working there for a decade. Roy caught his eye. Raised an eyebrow. Caleb said nothing. He stood in the yard watching her go. The rifle still across his arm. The sun still high and hot overhead. The 30 days still ticking down like a clock he couldn't stop. And for the first time in 3 months. Maybe longer. He felt something that wasn't quite dread sitting in his chest. That night, Broken Creek Ranch had its first real meal in 3 months. Nora Kane worked in the kitchen like a woman conducting surgery. Precise, efficient, no wasted motion. She'd taken one look at the cold stove, the empty shelves, the 3 pans hanging crooked on their hooks. Her expression hadn't changed. But her eyes had moved over everything the way a carpenter looks at a structure before deciding whether it can be saved. Then she'd rolled up her sleeves and started. By 6 o'clock, the kitchen smelled like food. Actual food, not the burnt offering smell of Sammy's attempts. Not the sad, boiled vegetable smell that had lingered for weeks, but the real smell of cooking: salt pork, cornbread, fried potatoes, beans simmering in a pot with something green Caleb didn't recognize but that made his stomach wake up and pay attention. The crew came in at 6:30, Roy first, then Sammy, then Pete and Darnell, 4 men who'd gotten used to eating in silence, who'd learned not to comment on the food because commenting meant acknowledging how bad it was. They sat down at the table. Nora set plates in front of them. They just ate. Sammy finished first, looked up, stared at his empty plate like he wasn't sure what had happened. Darnell ate 2 full servings. Petey, who never ate anything that wasn't bread or jerky, cleaned his plate and reached for seconds without a word. Roy ate slowly, methodically, the way he did everything. When he finished, he pushed back from the table, looked across at Caleb, who was sitting at the far end. Keep her, Roy said. That was all. 2 words, but coming from Roy Dalton, they carried the weight of a full speech. Caleb didn't respond. He ate without comment, but he cleaned his plate. He couldn't remember the last time he'd done that. Nora ate standing up, leaning against the far counter, watching everyone else eat the way a person watches something they've built to make sure it doesn't fall apart. She refilled coffee without being asked. She noticed that Danny Voss, Roy's nephew, 16 years old and quiet as a stone, hadn't touched his cornbread. Without a word, she cut a second piece and set it next to his plate. Danny looked up at her. She just lifted her chin at the plate. Eat. He ate. Caleb watched all of it. He told himself he was watching because it was his kitchen and his crew. But that wasn't all of it. And somewhere quiet inside him, he knew it. By the end of the first week, 3 things had changed at Broken Creek. First, the crew stopped eating in 5 minutes and leaving. They started sitting at the table, talking, laughing even, which was a sound the kitchen hadn't heard in so long it seemed to echo strangely off the walls. Second, the supply room was reorganized, not asked for, not assigned. Nora had simply done it one afternoon. Caleb found her there on the 3rd day, sorting through bags and tins with the focused efficiency of someone who had spent a long time learning to make limited resources last. He stood in the doorway for a moment watching. I didn't ask you to do that, he said. I know. She didn't look up. Kept sorting. Kept counting. Someone's been marking the flour bags as 30 pounds when they're closer to 20. You've been shortchanged on supplies for a while. Caleb went very still. Show me. She showed him. The evidence was simple. Damning the supplier in Millhaven had been skimming deliveries for at least 2 years. Small amounts. Careful amounts. Enough that no single delivery looked wrong. But across 2 years it added up to hundreds of dollars of missing goods. Nora had laid it all out in careful handwriting on the back of a feed receipt. Dates. Weights. Discrepancies. Caleb stood there looking at the paper for a long moment. You figured this out in a week, he said. I've worked in a lot of kitchens. She said it quietly. You learn to notice when things don't add up. He looked at her. Really looked at her. Not just the sharp features and the tight hair and the too-thin frame, but the intelligence behind it. The careful watchfulness of someone who'd learned survival meant paying attention to details other people missed. Why didn't you just leave it? He asked. She finally met his eyes, and there was something there. Not quite sadness, not quite anger, but something that had lived in the space between them for a long time. Because it wasn't right, she said, and because this ranch deserves better than being bled dry by someone counting on nobody to pay attention. Caleb didn't say anything for a moment. Couldn't, because nobody had said something like that to him in. He couldn't remember how long. Nobody had cared enough about Broken Creek to be angry on its behalf. He picked up the paper with her notes. I'll ride to Millhaven tomorrow. She nodded. Turned back to the supplies. He stood there another few seconds. Then he left before he said something he wasn't ready to say. Caleb rode to Millhaven before sunrise. 4 hours there, 4 hours back. The supplier folded almost immediately. The way men do when they've been getting away with something small for so long. They've forgotten to prepare for the day someone actually looks. He offered restitution. Caleb took it. He also changed suppliers, which cost him a half-day's ride to a town further east. But the new supplier had honest scales and a handshake that didn't feel like holding a wet fish. It wasn't $4,000. It wasn't even close, but it was something, a thread of ground that hadn't been completely lost. When Caleb got back to the ranch, it was past dark. He was tired, sore from 8 hours in the saddle, hungry in the way that goes past your stomach and settles into your bones. The kitchen window was lit. He could see Nora through it, standing at the counter, talking to someone. He came closer. Dizivos was sitting at the table, frowning at something in front of him. A small book lay open on the counter. Nora was pointing at something on the page, talking quietly. Patient Danny said something back. Still frowning, Nora shook her head, said something else. Pointed again, Danny tried again. This time Nora nodded, and the look on Danny's face, that specific mixture of surprise and pride that belongs entirely to the moment when something hard suddenly clicks into place, was one of the clearest things Caleb had seen in years. He stood there in the dark, watching through the window. Then he went around to the front door, came in quietly, hung his hat on the hook by the entry, walked into the kitchen. Nora looked up. You're back, just now. Danny quickly closed the book, looked at the table like he'd been caught doing something wrong. What is that? Caleb asked. A pause. Danny looked at the floor. Caleb looked at Nora. He's learning to read the supply ledger, Nora said simply. Can't he already read? Another pause. Longer this time. Danny's face went red. He reads a little, Nora said. Even. Calm. He'll read a lot more soon. She didn't offer to explain how she'd figured it out. Didn't justify why she'd decided to do something about it. She just turned back to the stove. Caleb stood there for a moment, feeling something strange move through his chest. Not warmth exactly, but the memory of warmth. The idea that people could simply notice things about each other and quietly decide to help. His father had told him never to trust that idea. People don't help. His father had said it 100 times. They take, they leave. They use you until you're empty, and then they move on to the next mark. Trust cattle, trust land, never trust people. Caleb had believed it for 41 years. But he was watching it happen, right here in his kitchen. A woman teaching a 16-year-old boy to read because she'd noticed he struggled and decided, without asking permission, without making a show of it. To help, Danny, Caleb said quietly. The boy looked up, still red-faced, still waiting to be told he was stupid or lazy or any of the other things people had probably told him his whole life. You keep working with her, Caleb said. Every night if you need to. Danny blinked. Sir, you heard me. Nora glanced over. Her expression flickered. Gone before he could name it. Now get to bed, Caleb said. Early start tomorrow. Danny grabbed the book, nodded, practically ran for the door. When he was gone, the kitchen went quiet. Just the sound of something simmering on the stove. Thank you, Nora said, not looking at him. Still facing the stove. For what? For not making him feel small, Caleb pulled out a chair, sat down heavily. He was tired, bone tired. The supplier in Millhaven? He said. You were right. He'd been skimming for 2 years. I got some of it back. She nodded. Still didn't turn around. Not enough to save the ranch, Caleb continued. But enough to matter. Everything matters, Nora said quietly. Even the small things. He watched her stir whatever was in the pot. Why are you here? He asked. She went still. Just for a second, you posted a job. I needed work, that's not what I'm asking. She set the spoon down. Turned around slowly. For a long moment she just looked at him, and he saw it again. That thing in her eyes. The look of someone who'd already seen the worst and was still standing anyway. Because I had nowhere else to go, she said finally. And because I'm tired of running. Running from what? She held his gaze. Ask me that again in a week, she said. And I'll tell you. Then she turned back to the stove, and Caleb sat there in the kitchen of his failing ranch, with a woman he'd known for 3 days, who was teaching his crew to read and finding theft in his supply room and cooking food that made grown men clean their plates. And he felt something he hadn't felt since long before his father died. Like maybe, just maybe, something good could still happen here. Vincent Cross came on a Thursday, mid-morning. The sun already high and mean. Caleb was in the barn going over the cattle ledger, trying to figure out how to stretch 40 head through winter when he needed 60 just to break even. The numbers weren't working. They hadn't worked in 3 years. He was about to close the book and go check the north fence when he heard raised voices from the direction of the supply road. Not shouting, not arguing, but voices that carried weight. He came out of the barn. Nora was standing 15 feet from a man Caleb didn't recognize. The man was heavyset, well-dressed for the frontier. Dark coat, clean boots. The particular easy arrogance of someone who had money and was accustomed to using it as a blunt instrument. Beside him stood one of the Millhaven freight drivers Caleb sometimes used. The driver looked distinctly uncomfortable. The stranger was smiling at Nora. The smile didn't reach his eyes, Miss Brooks. The man was saying, or is it Miss Carter now? I've lost track. Nora had gone absolutely still. Not the stillness of calm. The stillness of something that has stopped moving because movement draws attention to prey. I don't know you, she said. Her voice was flat. Empty. Sure you do. The man took a step toward her. You worked at the Langford Continental for nearly 3 years. A person doesn't forget 2.5 years of employment. Caleb was already moving. He crossed the yard in long strides. Put himself between them before he'd made a conscious decision to do it. This is private property, he said. He looked at the man steadily. No heat, no threat, just the plain fact. Who are you and what's your business here? The man studied him with mild interest. The way a man looks at an obstacle he hasn't decided is significant yet. My name is Vincent Cross, he said. Smooth, practiced. I represent business interests in St. Louis. I have a message for your cook, Mr. Mercer, Caleb Mercer. And whatever message you have, you can post it, because this conversation is over. Vincent's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted, Mr. Mercer. I'd encourage you not to involve yourself in something that... Get off my land. Caleb didn't raise his voice. He never had to. He simply looked at Vincent Cross, and Vincent Cross looked back at him, and whatever Cross saw. Apparently, it suggested the calculation wasn't worth it today. He smiled pleasantly, touched the brim of his hat, nodded to the driver. Of course, he said. My apologies for the interruption. He walked back to the wagon. The driver flicked the reins. They pulled out. Caleb didn't move until they were through the gate and down the road. Until the dust settled and the sound of wheels faded into the distance. Then he turned to Nora. She was still standing exactly where she'd been. Her hands were at her sides, fingers slightly curled. She was looking at the road where the wagon had gone, and her face had the look of someone watching something they'd always known was coming finally arrive. Nora, Caleb said. She closed her eyes for just a second. When she opened them, she looked at him directly. I need to tell you something, she said quietly. And I need you to hear all of it before you tell me to leave. They didn't go inside. Nora didn't want to go inside. They stood at the fence at the edge of the yard, the sun beating down, the ranch spreading out behind them like a promise someone had forgotten to keep. And Nora talked. She'd grown up in Kansas. Mother died when she was 22. Needed work, needed distance. Louis had seemed far enough. The Langford Continental Hotel was the grandest place she'd ever seen. Marble floors, gas lamps, a dining room that seated 300. She'd been hired as a kitchen assistant. Worked her way up to head kitchen manager in 18 months. Marcus Oswaldridge was one of the wealthiest men in Missouri. Railroad contracts, shipping interests, 2 newspapers. a network of business connections that stretched from Chicago to New Orleans. He was also charming, generous in public, and believed very sincerely that his money insulated him from consequence. He was right mostly. Nora's voice stayed level as she talked. She'd learned a long time ago that falling apart while telling a story gave other people permission to dismiss it. She discovered the operation by accident. A locked basement door that had been left open by mistake. A shipping manifest that listed cargo that didn't match any of the hotel's accounts. A conversation she overheard between Aldridge's head of security and a man she didn't recognize. They were speaking in careful, quiet sentences. About girls, about rail routes, about money changing hands at specific stops. She understood immediately what she was hearing, and the moment she understood, her life in St. Louis was over. Though she didn't know it yet, I went to the police, she said. Flat. Factual. The first officer I spoke to was on Aldridge's payroll. I found out 3 days later when 2 men followed me home from the market. She paused. I ran that night. Took what I could carry and left. Caleb looked at her. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of dust and cattle and distance. That was 2 years ago, Nora said. I've been moving since then. 3 states. 7 jobs. I thought I'd been careful enough. She finally looked at him directly. That man today, Vincent Cross, he's one of Aldridge's people. Which means they know where I am now. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, processing the woman in his kitchen. The careful way she checked the window latches at night, the fact that she'd arrived with 1 suitcase and a past she wouldn't talk about. It all made sense now. Terrible sense. Go to the federal marshals, he said. Her expression changed, not quite bitterness. But close, I tried that too, she said. Aldridge has connections that reach further than I can follow. I have no proof they'll accept, no witnesses who will risk themselves. Just my word against a very rich man's word. She looked out at the fence line. Cross came here to remind me that they found me, she said, and to give me a chance to make a different choice than the one I made 2 years ago. Meaning stay quiet, Caleb said. Meaning stay quiet. He looked out over the fence. The cattle moved slowly in the cold morning air. 40 head of cattle, 4 men. 1 month before the bank took everything he'd spent his life building. He didn't have a single logical reason to invite this problem onto his already collapsing ranch. But he thought about Danny learning to read at the kitchen table. He thought about Nora finding the theft in his supplies. He thought about the crew laughing at dinner for the first time in months. He thought about what kind of man his father had been. And what kind of man Caleb wanted to be. Did you tell me everything? He asked. She met his eyes. Yes, then you're not going anywhere, he said. Cross comes back, I'll deal with Cross. You keep cooking? She stared at him. Actually stared. Like she hadn't heard correctly. I'm serious about the cooking part, Caleb said. Roy's been walking around 3 inches taller since you started making actual biscuits. And I'm not explaining to him why that's ending. Nora looked at him for a long moment. And her face changed. Not a smile exactly, but a releasing, like a door unlocking from the inside. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me, Caleb said. Just keep the coffee hot. He walked back toward the barn, and inside his chest, something he'd kept locked for a very long time shifted, the smallest fraction of an inch. He didn't name it. He wasn't ready for that yet. But it was there. That night the latch on Nora's door still bolted twice. Old habits die hard. But when Caleb passed the kitchen window at midnight, on his way back from checking the water pump that had been making a sound he didn't like, the candle wasn't burning. She was asleep. And somewhere in that small fact, that for one night in this cold and struggling and nearly lost ranch, Nora Kane had slept without standing guard. Caleb felt something he hadn't felt since long before his father died. Like maybe the ranch wasn't just a place where hope came to die after all. Like maybe something was still alive here. He stood in the cold for a long moment. Then he went inside, bolted his own door, lay in the dark thinking about the way she'd looked at Vincent Cross when the man had stepped toward her. Not fear, not helplessness. Something much quieter and much more dangerous. Determination. The kind that doesn't break. The kind that has already decided it will survive. Morning came cold and clear. Caleb was up before the sun. He always was. Found Roy already at the water trough. Standing there with his arms crossed, looking at nothing in particular, the way Roy did when he was thinking about something he didn't want to say out loud. Spit it out, Caleb said. Roy glanced at him. Cross came back. Caleb went very still. When? Not here. In Millhaven. Yesterday afternoon. Asked around about the ranch. About you. About her. He paused. Asked specifically whether you had a wife or family. The implication settled between them like a stone dropped in still water. When did you hear this? Caleb asked. Sammy rode to town for salt yesterday afternoon. Heard it from Dolan at the feed store. Roy looked at him steadily. These are not ordinary men, Caleb. Dolan said Cross had two others with him. Quiet men who don't talk much and watch everything. Caleb was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that meant he was moving things around inside his head. Calculating. Does Nora know Sammy went to town? No, good. Keep it that way for now. He picked up the bucket. And Roy. Nobody talks about her in town. Nobody mentions her name, where she came from. Nothing. She's just the cook. That's all anyone needs to know. Roy studied him for a second. You know what you're stepping into. I know exactly what I'm stepping into. Roy didn't argue. He never argued when Caleb used that tone. He just nodded once. Slowly, and walked back toward the barn. Inside the kitchen, Nora was already at the stove. She'd been up before him. He could hear her moving around at 4:30. The careful, quiet sounds of someone who had learned long ago to exist without disturbing the air around them. By the time Caleb came through the back door, she had coffee on. Biscuit dough on the board. Was frying salt pork in the big cast iron pan with the focused efficiency to recognize as simply how she operated. No wasted motion. No wasted words. He poured himself coffee. Leaned against the counter. Cross was in Millhaven yesterday, he said. Her hands didn't stop moving. But they slowed. Just slightly. I figured he would be, she said. He was asking questions. About the ranch. About whether I have family? She set the fork down. Turned to face him. He's establishing whether you're a complication or a loose end, she said quietly. Which am I? That depends on what you do next. He drank his coffee. I already told you what I'm doing next, he said. Nothing changes, Caleb, she said his name. Plainly. Without softness or appeal. Just the word. The way you'd say it to someone you needed to actually hear you. I know what it looks like when someone is waiting to be abandoned, she said. I've been waiting for it my whole life too. From the other direction. Staying one step ahead of it, she paused. It's exhausting. Yes, he said. The word came out rougher than he meant it to. They stood there in the kitchen, the smell of coffee and salt pork between them. Outside, the sun was starting to come up, painting the eastern sky in shades of gray that would burn to gold in another 20 minutes. I need to ride to Caldwell today, Caleb said. There's someone there who might be able to help. Nora looked at him carefully. Who? Federal land officer named Garrett Hayes. He's not on anyone's payroll. I'd stake the ranch on it. And believe me, that means something right now. He set down his coffee cup. If you could write down everything you remember. Names, dates, what you saw. I can ride to Caldwell and put it in his hands directly. She stared at him. I've tried going to authorities before. You tried going to city police in St. Louis who were already bought, Caleb said. Hayes is federal. Different jurisdiction. Different accountability. And he owes me a favor from 3 years back that he hasn't had a chance to repay. She held his gaze for a long moment. He could see her working through it. Not the hope of it. She'd taught herself to distrust hope. But the risk. The calculation of whether this was the move that got her caught, or the move that finally got her free. And if Cross comes while you're in Caldwell, she asked. Roy will be here. And Roy was a deputy sheriff for 8 years before he came to work for me. He paused. You're not alone in this house, Nora. Stop acting like you are. Her expression flickered. Quick. Gone before he could name it. She turned back to the stove. All right, she said quietly. I'll write it down. He picked up his coffee. Start tonight. I want to ride at first light tomorrow. She nodded. And that was that. No dramatics, no gratitude speech, no promises. Just the small, solid agreement of two practical people, deciding to trust each other in a situation where trust was the most dangerous thing either of them had. Caleb went out to start morning chores. He didn't tell her about the second thing Roy had said, that Cross had been asking specifically whether Broken Creek was the kind of ranch a woman might stay on long term. Whether it had the look of permanence. He didn't tell her because it would have frightened her in a way that wasn't useful right now, but he held the information inside his chest all morning. Cold and heavy, like something he needed to carry until he figured out what to do with it, because what it told him was that Vincent Cross wasn't just looking to chase Nora off. He was looking to determine whether she'd put down roots, whether there were people around her who would fight, and then deciding how to handle those people. That afternoon, Danny came running from the supply road. Wide-eyed, out of breath. Mr. Mercer, he gasped. There's a rider at the east gate. Says he's got a message from Cross. Caleb was saddling a horse. He handed the reins to Danny, told him to stay in the barn, and walked out. The rider wasn't Cross. He was younger, mid-20s, trail dusty, wearing a jacket with a Millhaven Freight Company patch. He had the uncomfortable look of someone delivering a message he didn't write and didn't want to repeat. "Mr. Mercer," the writer said. "I have a communication from Mr. Vincent Cross. Hand it over." The writer held out a sealed envelope. Caleb took it, looked at it, looked at the writer. "Is there a verbal component?" he asked. "Mr. Cross asked me to say that a reply would be appreciated at your earliest convenience." "Where is he staying?" "The Millhaven Grand." "Sir," Caleb nodded once. "Tell Mr. Cross I'll reply in person." The writer's expression flickered. He expected a written. "I'll reply in person," Caleb said again. Same tone, same complete absence of hostility or heat. Just the fact. The writer left. Caleb opened the envelope. The letter inside was short, precise, written in the kind of careful, educated handwriting that cost money to develop. It was addressed not to Caleb, but as if Caleb wasn't a consideration at all. To Miss Nora Carter, formerly of St. Louis, Missouri. The letter offered a meeting. Discussed mutually agreeable resolution. Mentioned in carefully neutral language the recovery of certain property belonging to the Langford Continental Hotel, currently in Nora's possession. It was signed V. Cross, on behalf of Aldridge Enterprises. Caleb read it twice, then he folded it, put it in his coat pocket, and went to find Nora. She was in the garden beside the kitchen, a small patch she'd started working 2 weeks ago, turning the frozen ground over by hand because she'd said, when Caleb raised an eyebrow at it, that some things took time and the ground might as well be ready. She looked up when he came toward her. He handed her the letter without preamble. She read it. Her face went very still. Then she read it again. "Certain property," she said slowly. "What property?" She looked up at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Broken Creek, Caleb saw something in her that looked like it might be about to break through whatever wall she'd built. Not weakness, not helplessness, something rawer than that. "When I left St. Louis," she said slowly, "I took a ledger, one of the hotel's internal shipping ledgers. It listed cargo shipments by code, but I understood what the codes meant. Because I'd seen how they were used," she paused. "It was the only concrete evidence I had." "Where is it now?" Caleb asked. "In my bag, a beat, the one I sleep with." He was quiet for a moment. "Processing this, that's what they want," he said. "That's what they want. And if they get it, then there's no proof of anything. Aldridge is clean, and I'm a woman who spent 2 years running from a powerful man based on nothing but her own word." She folded the letter carefully. "He'd have me arrested inside a month." Caleb turned, looked out at the fence line. Then he said, "Can you write down the information in the ledger? From memory?" "The key parts?" She thought for a second. "Oh, most of it. I've read it enough times." "Good. Then tonight you write down everything you remember and give me that copy for Hayes." He paused. "And the original ledger." "Give me the ledger." She looked at him carefully. "Why? Because Cross knows it's in your bag. He knows what he's looking for. But he doesn't know this ranch." He met her eyes. "I do." She held his gaze for a long moment. This was the real trust, he understood. Not the words, not the declarations. This. The moment where she had to decide whether to put the one thing that stood between her and Marcus Aldridge into the hands of a man she'd known for less than a week. She went inside. She came back 2 minutes later with a slim leather-bound book, worn at the corners, the spine cracked from being opened so many times. She held it out. He took it. He didn't open it. "Didn't need to read it right now. I'll keep it safe," he said. "I know," she said. And the steadiness in those 2 words told him she did. That she wasn't saying it to reassure herself. She was saying it because she'd decided it was true. He put the ledger inside his coat. "Burn the letter," he said. She burned it. That evening after dinner, Nora sat at the kitchen table writing. Caleb sat across from her, going over the supply accounts. The real ones. The corrected ones now that he'd dealt with the Millhaven supplier the crew had eaten. Were sitting around talking. The fire in the stove threw warm light against the walls. Roy was telling a story about a horse he'd tried to break 20 years ago. Sammy was laughing. Pete was grinning. Darnell was shaking his head. And Danny. Danny was at the far corner of the table with his book open, frowning at a page. His pencil moving slowly across the paper. Nora glanced over at him, said something quiet. Danny looked up, said something back. She pointed at something on his page. He tried again. This time she nodded. And the look on his face. That moment when something hard suddenly makes sense. Caleb watched all of it. The kitchen warm, the crew together. The quiet work of people existing in the same space without needing to perform or prove anything. This was what his father had never understood. That a ranch wasn't just land and cattle, it was people, and people who felt seen and safe and valued. Those people stayed. Those people fought. Those people built something that lasted. Caleb looked down at his ledger, made a note, and decided that tomorrow, When he rode to Caldwell to see Garrett Hayes, he was going to make damn sure that Marcus Aldridge never touched Nora Kane again. Whatever it took, whatever it cost, she'd given him his ranch back. The least he could do was give her a life. Dawn came cold. Caleb was already dressed, already moving. He found Roy in the barn before the sun cleared the horizon. "I'm riding to Caldwell," Caleb said. "Be back by nightfall." Roy nodded. "Didn't ask why. Didn't need to. You want me to tell the crew? Tell them what they need to know." "Nothing more." Roy studied him for a moment. "You're making this official, I'm making this right. Those aren't always the same thing." "They are today." Caleb saddled his horse. The bay mare he'd had for 6 years. Steady, reliable, the kind of horse that wouldn't spook if things went sideways. Which, given what he was riding into, was a real possibility. Nora appeared in the barn doorway. She had a cloth bundle in her hands. Still warm. He could see steam rising from it. "Breakfast," she said. For the road he took it. Their fingers brushed. Just for a second, she pulled back quickly, like she'd touched something hot. "The papers you wrote," Caleb said. "They're in my saddlebag. The ledger's there, too." "Be careful," she said. "Always am, Caleb." He stopped, looked at her. "If Hayes can't help, he'll help, but if he can't, or won't, I need you to promise me something." He waited. "Promise me you'll come back here and tell me the truth," she said. "Don't try to protect me from it. Don't soften it. Just tell me the truth." He looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd already been lied to by every authority figure she'd tried to trust, who'd learned the hard way that soft words from powerful people usually meant the door was already closing. "I promise," he said. She nodded. Stepped back. He mounted up, rode out, didn't look back, because if he looked back he might see the expression on her face that said she wasn't sure he was coming back at all, and he couldn't afford to think about that right now. The ride to Caldwell took 4 hours. 4 hours of cold wind and hard ground and the rhythmic sound of hooves on packed dirt. Caleb spent most of it running calculations in his head. How much time they had. What Vincent Cross was capable of. Whether Garrett Hayes would take this seriously or smile, that careful federal smile, and file it somewhere permanent and useless. Whether Caleb Mercer, failing rancher, son of a bitter man who died in debt and shame, had any right to walk into a federal office and demand justice for a woman he'd known for a week. He pushed that thought down, because the truth was, it didn't matter how long he'd known her. It mattered what was right, and this was right. Caldwell was a town trying very hard to be a city. 2 hotels, 3 saloons, a bank, a courthouse, and a federal land office tucked between the general store and the barber shop like an afterthought. The Caleb tied his horse outside. Walked in. The office was small, cluttered, papers stacked on every surface. A single desk near the window where a man sat writing something in careful script. Garrett Hayes was 60 years old, spare, gray mustache. The watchful economy of someone who'd spent decades in rooms where words cost something. He looked up when Caleb came in. For a moment he didn't recognize him. Then his eyes focused. "Mercer, Hayes, didn't expect to see you in town. Got something you need to see?" Hayes set down his pen, gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." Caleb sat, pulled the papers from his saddlebag, set them on the desk. "What's this?" "Evidence of a trafficking operation running through St. Louis. Been operating at least 6 years. Maybe longer." Hayes went very still, the kind of still that meant he was paying attention now. Really paying attention. He picked up the papers, started reading. Caleb watched his face, watched the moment Hayes realized this wasn't rumor or hearsay or second-hand gossip. This was documentation, dates, names, routes, coded shipments that matched known rail schedules, financial transactions that connected back to a single source, Marcus Aldridge. Hayes read for 10 minutes without speaking. When he finished, he set the papers down carefully. "Where did you get this?" "Woman working at my ranch. She was employed at the Langford Continental. Saw things she shouldn't have seen. Took one of their ledgers when she ran. She have the original?" Caleb pulled the slim leather book from his coat, set it beside the papers. Hayes picked it up, opened it. Flipped through pages covered in neat columns of numbers and abbreviated codes. "This is substantial," he said slowly. "It's more than substantial. It's proof." Hayes looked at him. "Who else knows about this? You, me, her, and the men who've been chasing her for 2 years trying to get it back. They know where she is? They found her 3 days ago. One of Aldridge's men came to my ranch, made threats, delivered letters." Caleb leaned forward. "Hayes, I need you to understand something. This woman has been running for 2 years. She's tried police. She's tried local authorities. Every time she surfaces, they find her. Every time she trusts someone, that someone turns out to be bought." He paused. "She's running out of places to run. And I'm running out of ways to keep her safe without federal help. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You understand what you're asking me to do. I understand exactly what I'm asking you to do. Marcus Aldridge is connected. We're talking about railroad money, political influence, newspapers. The kind of man who has dinners with governors. I know who he is. Taking him down isn't a matter of filing paperwork and serving a warrant," Hayes continued. "It's a matter of building a case brick by brick, finding witnesses who'll testify, getting cooperation from local jurisdictions that might not want to cooperate." He set the ledger down. "It takes time." "How much time?" 3 weeks, maybe 4. If everything goes right, Caleb felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I have 1 week, maybe less." Hayes looked at him steadily. "Then we'd better work fast." Caleb rode back to Broken Creek with Hayes's words ringing in his ears. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Vincent Cross wasn't going to wait 3 weeks. He knew it. Hayes knew it. The only question was what Cross would do when he moved, and how much damage he'd do before Hayes could get a warrant filed. The sun was setting when Caleb came through the ranch gates. He could see smoke rising from the kitchen chimney, could hear voices from the barn, the familiar sounds of evening chores winding down. Roy was waiting by the water trough. "How'd it go?" "Hayes is opening a formal inquiry. He'll move as fast as he can, but we're looking at 3 weeks minimum." Roy's jaw tightened. "We don't have 3 weeks, I know. So what do we do?" Caleb dismounted, started unsaddling his horse. "We prepare," he said. "Starting tonight." Inside the kitchen, Nora was at the stove. She looked up when he came in, didn't say anything, just searched his face. "Hayes is filing the inquiry," Caleb said. "It's official now. Federal investigation into Aldridge and everyone connected to him." Her expression changed. Relief, fear, hope. All of it at once. "On long?" she asked. 3 weeks. Her face went carefully blank. "That's a long time." "Yes." She turned back to the stove. "Cross won't wait 3 weeks, I know. So what happens now?" Caleb pulled out a chair, sat down heavily. He was tired. 4 hours there, 4 hours back. The weight of what he'd set his motion pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. "Now we get ready," he said, "because when Cross makes his move, and he will make his move, we need to be ready to hold this ground until Hayes can get here." Nora nodded slowly. She didn't ask how they were supposed to hold ground against men like Vincent Cross with 4 ranch hands and a 62-year-old foreman. She didn't need to ask. They both already knew the answer. They'd hold it the way people always held ground when they had something worth protecting. By refusing to leave, Caleb called the crew together the next morning. All of them. Roy, Sammy, Pete, Darnell, Danny. They stood in the barn, early light coming through the gaps in the boards, the smell of hay and horses and leather. "I need to tell you something," Caleb said. They waited. Nora's in trouble. The kind of trouble that comes from seeing something powerful men wanted kept quiet. She's been running for 2 years. They found her here 3 days ago. He paused. "Which means this ranch is now in the middle of something that has nothing to do with cattle or land or anything we signed up for." Sammy shifted his weight. Pete looked at the ground. Darnell's face was carefully neutral. Danny just watched Caleb with those quiet eyes that saw more than a 16-year-old should have to see. "I'm giving each of you a choice," Caleb continued. "Stay or go. No judgment either way, no consequences. If you want to ride out before this gets worse, do it now." Silence. Long silence, then Sammy said, "You're giving us a choice to leave." "I am. Without penalty?" "Without penalty." Sammy looked at Pete. Pete looked at Darnell. Darnell looked at his boots for a long moment. Then he said, "She taught me how to make gravy last week." Roy raised an eyebrow. "That's your deciding factor?" "She didn't make me feel stupid for not knowing how," Darnell said simply. "Nobody's ever done that." The barn stayed quiet. Then Sammy said, "I'm staying." Pete said, "Same." Danny didn't say anything, just nodded once. Caleb looked at each of them. He wasn't a man who said thank you easily. It had never come naturally to him. Words in general didn't come naturally to him. But he felt the weight of what they'd just given him, and he didn't pretend otherwise. "All right," he said. "Then here's how we're doing this." He laid out the plan. Sammy and Pete would take rotating watches through the night, 2-hour shifts, one at the north fence, one at the supply road gate. Nobody rode out alone. Nobody talked about ranch business in Millhaven. Roy would keep his rifle visible, not threatening, just present. The quiet language that says this land is watched and the people on it are not soft targets. Danny would help Nora in the kitchen. Stay close to the house. Learn to shoot if he didn't already know how. Which he didn't. "I'll teach him," Roy said. Caleb nodded. "Good, and Nora?" Roy asked. "She know what's coming? She knows? She all right?" Caleb thought about the way she'd looked at him last night. The careful blankness of her face when he'd told her 3 weeks. She's surviving, he said. That's what she does. The first attack came at 3 in the morning. Pete was on north fence watch when he heard it. Not gunfire, not shouting, but the distinctive bawling of panicked cattle moving fast in the wrong direction. He came running for the bunkhouse. Had Roy up and moving in under a minute. Roy had Caleb up in 30 seconds after that. They lost 11 head before they got the herd under control. Someone had cut the north fence line in 2 places. Come through from the ridge road. Run the cattle toward the creek bed in the dark. Not enough to destroy the herd. Enough to cost money they didn't have. Enough to exhaust the crew. Enough to make the point that Broken Creek's soft spots had been identified. Caleb stood at the gap in the fence in the pre-dawn dark, looking at the cut wire. Clean cut. Professional, this wasn't vandalism. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. 4 men. Maybe 5, Roy said beside him. Moved fast. Knew the fence layout. They scouted, Caleb said. Yes, he looked at the gap in the wire, the trampled ground, the distant sound of cattle still unsettled somewhere down by the creek. This is the warning before the real move, he said. They want us tired, short-handed, rattled. Well, Roy said, 2 out of 3 maybe. They spent the next 3 hours repairing fence, tracking cattle through the creek bed. By the time the sun was fully up, they'd recovered 9 of the 11 head. 2 were gone, either dead in the creek or run too far in the dark to follow, at current market prices. That was a loss Caleb felt in his jaw. He came back to the house dirty and cold. Nora had breakfast on the table before he reached the porch. She'd been up since Pete's shout, had heard everything through the thin walls of the ranch house, and had done the most useful thing she could think of. Made food. Coffee, eggs, fried potatoes, the last of the bacon. Enough for everyone. She handed Caleb a cup without a word when he came through the door. He looked at her. You heard? All of it. How bad? She asked. Could be worse, Caleb said. It'll get worse. She nodded once, set a plate in front of him. Then eat now. He ate. The crew ate. Nobody said much. But there was something in the silence of that kitchen, the warmth of it, the smell of coffee, the simple fact of a table full of food when everything outside was cold and costly and dangerous, that held them together in a way that no speech could have. Darnell, 19 years old, carrying 2 dead cattle in his conscience even though it wasn't his fault. He looked at his plate and said quietly, "What do we do now, Nora?" From across the table, said, "We do what we were doing before. We work the ranch. We keep the routine. Because the minute we look like we're rattled is the minute they know they're winning." Sammy looked at her. "You've dealt with this before. I've been running from it for 2 years," she said. "There's a difference. I'm not running now." The table went quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. The kind that happens when something has been decided. Vincent Cross came back that afternoon. Not to the ranch, to the south gate. Sent a rider ahead with a message. The rider was the same young man from before. Millhaven Freight Patch, uncomfortable expression. "Mr. Cross requests a meeting," the rider said. "Just you and him." South gate. 1 hour, Caleb looked at him. "Tell Cross I'll be there." The rider hesitated. He said. "To come alone," I heard him. The rider left. Roy appeared from the barn. "You're not going alone, that's what he asked for." "I don't care what he asked for. Men who specify alone are men who want to control all the variables." Caleb pulled his rifle from the porch. "Check the load." "Then I'll bring a variable he doesn't expect," he said. Roy went to get his own rifle. Vincent Cross was waiting at the tree line. 2 horses behind him, 1 man beside him. Not the heavy-set messenger, but someone younger, sharper looking, with the particular stillness of someone whose job was not to talk. Caleb came through the south gate. Roy stayed 3 steps behind and to the right. Rifle across his forearm, not raised, not threatening, just present. The way Caleb had asked. Cross looked at Roy for a moment. Then he looked at Caleb. "I said alone," Cross said. "I heard you," Caleb said. He stopped 10 feet out. "What do you want, Cross?" The pleasantness that Cross had worn at their first meeting was gone, not replaced by aggression, replaced by something more economical. The face of a man who has moved past the pretense stage and is now simply conducting business. "Mr. Aldridge has authorized me to make you a direct offer," Cross said. $30,000. Wired to any bank account you name within 72 hours of your agreement. Caleb said nothing. In exchange, Cross continued, "Miss Carter, or Brooks, or Kane, whichever she's calling herself, leaves this property tonight. You report no knowledge of her whereabouts. And whatever documentation she's carrying is surrendered." He paused. $30,000 would retire your bank debt and leave you enough to rebuild this ranch 3 times over. Cross said it without emphasis, without salesmanship. He was simply stating a fact. That's generous of him, Caleb said. Given that he's apparently been draining this ranch for 6 years through Russell Webb, Cross's expression didn't change. But the man beside him shifted his weight. I don't know what you've been told, Cross said carefully. I know what's in the ledger, Caleb said. And I know Garrett Hayes is in Caldwell right now, building a federal inquiry around Webb's land record fraud, which connects directly to Aldridge's rail operation, which connects directly to what Nora Kane witnessed at the Continental Hotel. He paused. The question isn't whether I'll take your money. The question is whether you understand that the offer is 2 days too late. Cross looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not fear exactly, but a rapid calibration. The look of a man who had walked into a room expecting to find one thing and found something considerably more complicated. You've been in contact with federal authorities, Cross said slowly. Formally, Caleb said. Documented. On record that complicates things unnecessarily. It does, Caleb agreed. For Aldridge, not for me. Silence. The man beside Cross was very still now. The kind of still that Caleb didn't like. He kept him in his peripheral vision. Mr. Mercer. Cross's voice was level, but something beneath it had shifted. A slight tightening. You're a smart man, so I'll speak plainly. He paused. Mr. Aldridge does not lose. He has not lost in 30 years of doing business across 4 states. Whatever inquiry your federal officer has opened, Aldridge has the resources and the connections to outlast it. Another pause. This will be long. It will be expensive. And at the end of it, your ranch will still be here and Mr. Aldridge will still be in St. Louis. Cross looked at him steadily. Take the money, send the woman away, live your life. Caleb looked back at him. She's not for sale. 3 words. Said the same way he said everything. Without heat. Without theater. Just the plain absolute fact of the matter. Cross stared at him. You're choosing a woman you've known for 3 weeks, he said slowly, as if testing whether he'd misheard. Over $30,000 and the survival of your ranch. I'm choosing what's right, Caleb said. The woman is part of that, but she's not all of it. He took one step forward. You tell Aldridge this. The ledger, the web connection, the rail routes, the names, all of it is in federal hands. It's been documented, witnessed, filed. He held Cross's gaze. Anything that happens to Nora Kane, to anyone on this property, to this ranch, it becomes part of the federal record, and it points directly back to Aldridge. Another step. He can send you back here with more men and more money, and it won't change what's already been set in motion. Or, he can cut his losses, distance himself from Webb, and pray the inquiry stops at the land fraud and doesn't go deeper. Caleb stopped. That's his choice. But he needs to make it in the next 24 hours, because after that, Hayes's inquiry expands. And I can't guarantee what it finds or where it stops. It was a bluff. Partly. The part about Hayes's inquiry expanding was real enough. Hayes had said as much. The part about Caleb being able to control what it found was not real at all. But Cross didn't know that. And Cross, Caleb had correctly read, was a man who balanced risk, who had survived this long in Aldridge's service by knowing when a situation had turned against him. The silence stretched. 5 long seconds. Then Cross said very quietly, I'll relay your message. He turned. The man beside him turned. They walked back to their horses. Caleb stood at the gate and watched them ride. He didn't move until they were fully out of sight. Then Roy came up beside him. Think he'll pull back? Roy asked. No, Caleb said. But I think we bought time. How much? He started walking back toward the ranch. Enough, he was wrong about the time. He had 6 hours. The attack came at 2 in the morning, and it came the way all serious violence comes. Not announced, not dramatically, but suddenly, and from multiple directions at once. Pete saw the torch first. Coming from the east side of the property, he shouted. By the time Caleb got his boots on, and his rifle in hand, the barn was already burning. The far corner where the hay storage attached to the main structure, and 3 men were moving across the yard toward the house. Everything happened fast. Caleb remembered it later not as a sequence of events, but as a series of terrible, clear moments. Like photographs taken in lightning. Sammy firing from the bunkhouse window, 2 men going low and scattering, Roy moving across the yard with his rifle up, shouting something Caleb couldn't hear over the sound of the fire. The barn, his father's barn, 30 years old, built board by board in a summer Caleb barely remembered because he'd been 7 years old, burning with a roar that swallowed everything near it. And then the shot, not aimed at Caleb, aimed past him, toward the house, the sound of breaking glass, and a voice he recognized. Danny, 16 years old, who'd heard the commotion and come out and done exactly what Caleb had told him not to do. The boy went down. Caleb was at his side in 4 strides. Danny was on the ground, holding his left arm, face white, breathing fast, shot arm. Not chest. Caleb checked it in the dark with his hands, felt the wound through the muscle, not bone, bleeding hard, but not the kind of bleeding that killed you immediately. Stay down, Caleb said. Don't move, I was trying to, I know. Stay down. He got up and went back into it. The men who'd come across the yard had retreated. Sammy's fire from the bunkhouse window had been accurate enough to make closing the distance costly, and Roy had put a shot close enough to the one with the torch to convince him the barn was enough damage for tonight. It was over in less than 10 minutes, which meant they'd planned it to be a quick strike. Not an occupation. A demonstration. Caleb stood in the yard with the barn burning behind him. Looking at what remained, the far corner was gone. The main structure was damaged but standing. The fire hadn't reached the horses who were panicked in their stalls but alive. The house was intact. The crew was alive. And Danny Voss was on the porch with Nora kneeling beside him, her hands pressing a cloth against his arm, talking to him in a low, steady voice that was calm enough to be remarkable, given that she'd just lived through an armed attack on a ranch she'd brought to its door. She looked up when Caleb came onto the porch. He needs his doctor, she said. Millhaven. I'll take him, I'm coming, Nora. I am coming, she said, and the flatness in her voice said the conversation was over. He didn't argue. Danny was helped into the wagon. Roy stayed with Sammy and Pete to manage the fire and the horses. Caleb drove. Nora sat in the back with Danny, her hand keeping pressure on the wound, talking to him about nothing important, what she was going to make for breakfast, whether he preferred apple preserves or plum, whether he thought Roy's opinion about the water pump was right, or whether the fitting was the actual problem. Steady, calm, ordinary words doing the work of keeping a frightened boy from going inside himself where the fear lived. Danny answered haltingly at first, then more normally. By the time they reached the edge of Millhaven, he was asking about the apple preserves, with what sounded like genuine interest. Caleb drove and listened and didn't say a word. He was thinking about a barn his father had built. He was thinking about Russell Webb sitting in a comfortable office in Caldwell, signing fraudulent documents. He was thinking about Marcus Aldridge in a St. Louis hotel, who had decided at some point in the last 30 years that other people were resources. And he was thinking about a woman in the back of his wagon, making sure a 16-year-old boy felt less alone. Because that was simply what she did. She looked at broken things and decided to help. Without being asked, without calculating the cost, because that was who she was underneath everything that had been done to her. The doctor was awake. Small-town doctors were always awake when they needed to be. He took Danny in. Came out 20 minutes later with the report Caleb had hoped for. The wound was clean. The muscle would heal. Danny would need rest and restricted use for several weeks. But there was nothing permanent. Roy's nephew would be all right. Caleb sat on the bench outside the doctor's office in the dark. Nora came out after the doctor. Sat beside him, not close. Just present, it's my fault, she said. No, Caleb said immediately. Caleb. Aldridge made a decision, cross-executed it. If I hadn't come here. If you hadn't come here, Caleb interrupted. I'd still be eating Sammy's cooking and wondering why everyone kept leaving. He looked at her. You didn't bring this here. It was already here. Aldridge, Webb the fraud, all of it. You just gave it a face. She was quiet for a moment. Danny is going to be fine, he added. Doctor said so, I know. But her voice said she didn't quite believe it. Caleb looked at his hands. When we get back, he said, I'm going to wire Hayes. Tell him what happened tonight. Armed assault, arson, injury to a minor. He paused. That's not a land records inquiry anymore. That's a federal criminal case. She looked at him. You think Hayes can move fast enough? I think after tonight he doesn't have a choice. Silence. Then Nora said, thank you. For what? For not giving up on me. He looked at her. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a man who ran a dying ranch alone, and preferred it that way. A man who had closed himself off so completely that the absence of people felt like something he'd chosen, rather than something that had been taken from him. He wasn't entirely sure who he was right now, but he knew it was different. We should get back, he said. She nodded. They stood up, and in the dark outside the doctor's office in Millhaven, with a 16-year-old boy sleeping inside and a burning barn behind them, and everything still uncertain and dangerous, something passed between them that had nothing to do with survival strategy. It was quick. She looked away first, but neither of them forgot it. They rode back to the ranch at first light. Danny dozed in the back of the wagon, arm bandaged, face less pale than it had been. The barn's east corner was a ruin of blackened timber when they arrived. The smell of smoke hung over the whole property, but the horses were out and accounted for. The main structure was standing, and Sammy had organized Pete and Darnell into a watch rotation that kept the perimeter covered through the remaining dark hours. Roy met them at the gate, with coffee, which Caleb decided in that moment was the single most useful thing a man could do. "Danny," Roy said. "He'll be all right," Nora said. "Doctor wants him resting for 2 weeks." Roy's face changed. Relief controlled fast. He nodded once. "Good." Caleb told Roy what he'd told Nora, that he was wiring Hayes today. That armed assault changed everything, that the inquiry would have to move faster now, or risk looking like it had let violence happen on its watch. Roy listened without interrupting. When Caleb finished, Roy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long you think we have before they come back?" "Could be tonight. Could be a week. Cross lost a man last night. I saw someone go down on the east end side and not get back up." Caleb paused. "He won't commit to a second attack on a defended position without clear orders from Aldridge. And Aldridge is going to be cautious now that he knows Hayes is involved." Roy considered this. "That's probably right." He looked at Nora. "You holding up?" She met his eyes, and something passed between them, a recognition. The kind that happens between people who have both spent a long time being steady for everyone around them and rarely get asked how they are. "I'm holding up," she said. "Good," Roy said, "because we need you." It was the simplest thing he could have said, and somehow the most important. Nora nodded. Roy walked back toward what was left of the barn. The telegram from Garrett Hayes arrived 2 days later. Sammy brought it from town, handed it to Caleb at the barn door. Caleb opened it standing there, read it once. Then again the message was in the clipped language of official communications. Inquiry formally opened. Webb under review. Recommend patience. Presence being established. He read it a third time. Then he folded it, put it in his pocket, walked across the yard to where Nora was hanging laundry on the line behind the house. She saw him coming, saw something in his face. Her hand stopped moving. "What happened?" He handed her the telegram. She read it. Her lips moved slightly as she worked through the words. When she finished, she just stood there, holding the paper, the wind moving the sheets on the line beside her. "Webb is under review," she said. Flat, like she was testing the words to see if they were real. "Yes." Hayes moved fast on that, because that's the thread that unravels everything, Caleb said. Webb is the bridge between Aldridge's operation and legitimate legal cover. If Hayes pulls that thread, the whole network comes apart. Nora looked at him. "Which means Aldridge knows that." "Yes, which means Cross won't wait anymore." "No," he agreed. "He won't." They stood there for a moment in the cold. The garden between them, the ranch behind them. The fence line Caleb's father had built post by post over 20 years. The land that had been slowly, quietly, stolen from both of them by a man in a St. Louis hotel who had never once gotten his hands dirty. "I want to ask you something," Nora said. "Ask when this is over. If Hayes builds the case. If Aldridge goes down. If Webb's fraud is exposed and your land debt gets untangled." She stopped, started again. "What do you want for the ranch? What does it look like when it's right?" He hadn't expected that question. Not because it was difficult, but because nobody had asked him that in so long he'd forgotten there was an answer. He thought for a moment. "Full crew," he said. 40, 50 head of cattle. The north pasture fence rebuilt properly. Not the patchwork it is now." He paused. "Kitchen that smells like something's cooking." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "That's a practical list." "I'm a practical man, Caleb." She said it the way she did. Just the word. Clean and direct. "What do you actually want?" He looked at her, and this time he didn't deflect, didn't reach for his hat or find a reason to turn away. He just looked at her and let the silence answer in the way silences do when two people are paying close enough attention. She looked back at him, and the color in her face changed. Not embarrassment, not quite. Something more complicated and more honest than that. Then footsteps came running from the direction of the barn, and the moment broke like ice in spring. "Mr. Mercer," Sammy called, out of breath, eyes wide. "There's someone at the south gate, deputy from Caldwell. Says Marshal Hayes sent him." Caleb turned. Nora was already moving. They walked to the south gate together. The deputy was young, maybe 25, Caldwell County badge pinned to his vest. He straightened when Caleb approached. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "Marshal Hayes asked me to ride out personally. He wanted you to know." He paused. "Russell Webb was taken into custody 3 hours ago. Formal charges filed. Federal warrant executed." Caleb felt something shift in his chest. "And," he said, "and Marshal Hayes's men are riding to Millhaven now. To locate Vincent Cross." The deputy looked at Nora. "Hayes also said to tell you." His exact words. "The woman is clear." Nora made a sound. Not quite a sob, not quite a laugh, just something. She put her hand over her mouth. stood there with her hand over her mouth and her eyes bright and her whole body shaking slightly. 2 years, 7 jobs, 3 states, every locked window, every checked door, every night spent calculating which way to run, all of it collapsing into a single sentence delivered by a Caldwell deputy on a cold road in the middle of nowhere. The woman is clear. Caleb looked at her. She wasn't crying. She'd learned a long time ago not to cry where people could see. But her eyes were doing something that looked like crying without the tears. "Thank you," she said to the deputy. Her voice was steady. She made it steady. The deputy tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he turned his horse. Headed back south, Caleb and Nora stood there at the gate. The wind moved between them. After a long moment, Caleb said, "You're safe." She nodded, still not looking at him, still looking at the road where the deputy had gone. I don't know what to do now," she said quietly. "You breathe," Caleb said. "You come inside. You sit down, you let it be real." She finally looked at him, and in her eyes he saw everything she'd been carrying for 2 years. "All of it. Right there, Caleb," she said. "Yeah, I need a minute. Take as long as you need." She nodded, turned away, walked back toward the house, not quickly, not slowly, just walked, like she was learning how to move in a world where nobody was chasing her anymore. And Caleb stood at the gate watching her go, feeling something in his chest that he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. Pride, not in himself, in her, for surviving, for standing, for refusing to break when everything was designed to break her, for being, after all of it, still here, still whole, still fighting. Vincent Cross was arrested in Millhaven the following morning. 2 of his associates were arrested with him. A third had apparently left the territory before Hayes's men arrived, which Hayes said in a subsequent telegraph was a minor loose end he expected to resolve within the week. The news came via Sammy again, who rode into town for salt and came back with information instead. Caleb listened to the report. Then he went to find Nora. She was in the kitchen. Where else would she be? Kneading dough for the evening bread with the focused efficiency that meant she was thinking about something other than bread. "Cross is in custody," Caleb said. Her hands stopped moving, just for a second, then started again. "When?" she asked. "This morning. Millhaven Grand Hotel. Hayes's men took him without incident. And Aldridge?" "Hayes says Aldridge's lawyers are already filing objections. But the inquiry's moving forward. Asset freeze, witness protection, the whole federal machinery." Caleb leaned against the counter. "It's over, Nora," she kept kneading. "It's not over until Aldridge is in prison," she said quietly. "Until then it's just." Paused. "Hayes says the case is solid. Hayes doesn't know what Aldridge is capable of." "Maybe not," Caleb said. "But Hayes knows what the law is capable of. And right now the law is on your side." She finally stopped, looked at him. "I've been running for 2 years," she said. "You don't just stop because someone says it's safe. You stop when your body finally believes it." She paused. "I don't believe it yet." He understood that. Of course he did. Trust wasn't something you decided to feel. It was something you grew into slowly, after enough evidence accumulated that the world wasn't trying to kill you. "Then don't believe it yet," he said. "Just try to rest. Try to breathe. Try to let the people around you carry some of the weight." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she went back to kneading, but her shoulders had changed. Something in them, released, just slightly, just enough. The days that followed were strange. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing did. No more attacks. No more midnight visitors. No more men appearing at gates with letters and threats. Just work. The barn needed rebuilding. The fence needed mending. The cattle needed tending. And the crew, slowly, carefully, started to relax. Sammy laughed more. Pete stopped checking over his shoulder every 5 minutes. Darnell started telling stories at dinner about his childhood that were funny instead of sad. Danny's arm healed clean. By the end of the 2nd week, he was back to light work. By the end of the 3rd week, he was reading supply ledgers on his own, and only occasionally asking Nora to confirm a word he wasn't sure of. Roy watched all of it with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had worked 20 years to keep this place alive, and was finally seeing it remember how to live. And Nora. Nora cooked. She worked the garden. She reorganized the pantry again, because apparently that's what she did when she needed to think. She stood at the kitchen window at night, but she didn't check the latch anymore. She just stood there, looking out at the dark, at the ranch, at the place that had somehow become hers, without her noticing when it happened. Caleb watched her when she didn't know he was watching, which was often, and he thought about the way she'd looked at him in the garden when he'd told her about the ranch he wanted to build. The way her face had changed when she'd asked him what he actually wanted. He hadn't answered then, but he had an answer now. He wanted this. this kitchen, this crew, this woman standing at the window learning how to be still. He wanted mornings that didn't start with fear, and evenings that ended with people sitting around a table talking about nothing important. He wanted a life, not just a ranch, not just land, a life, and he wanted it with her, but he didn't say that yet, because she was still learning how to breathe without running, and he wasn't going to rush her, not when she'd spent 2 years being rushed by men who wanted things from her. He could wait. He'd waited 41 years to feel like this. He could wait a little longer. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in early September. Sammy brought it from town, handed it to Caleb at the barn door. Caleb opened it standing there. Read it once. Then again. Webb cooperating fully. Evidence substantial. Aldridge assets frozen pending trial. Formal charges filed. Warrant issued. Arrest executed St. Louis dawn today. Case proceeding. Hayes. He read it a third time. Then he folded it, put it in his pocket, walked across the yard to where Nora was hanging laundry on the line behind the house. She saw him coming, saw something in his face. Her hands stopped moving. What happened? He handed her the telegram. She read it. Her lips moved slightly as she worked through the words. When she finished, she just stood there, holding the paper, the wind moving the sheets on the line beside her. He's arrested, she said, flat, like she was testing the words to see if they were real. Yes, Marcus Aldridge is arrested. Yes, she looked at him. This is real, it's real. Her face changed. Not joy exactly, not relief. Something deeper than both. Like a door that had been locked for 2 years suddenly opening from the inside. She sat down on the ground, just sat right there in the dirt beside the laundry basket. Caleb crouched beside her. You all right? I don't know, she said. Her voice was strange, distant. I don't know what I am. You're safe, he said. I know, you're free, I know, but she said it like she didn't know, like the words didn't connect to anything real yet. He sat down beside her in the dirt. They sat there together while the sheets moved in the wind and the ranch carried on around them. Roy walked by, saw them sitting there, kept walking without a word. Because Roy understood some things didn't need commentary. After a while, Nora said, What happens now? Now we wait, Caleb said. Hayes will build the case. Aldridge's lawyers will fight. Could take months. Could take a year or longer. But I'm done running. You're done running. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapped her arms around them. I don't know how to do that, she said quietly. Do what? Stop, I've been moving for so long. I don't know how to just be somewhere. Caleb looked at her. This woman who had survived 2 years on the road, who had walked into his ranch with one suitcase and changed everything she touched, who had taught Danny to read and found theft in his supply room and made biscuits that Roy talked about like they were divine intervention, who was sitting in the dirt right now because her body didn't know what to do with safety yet. You learn, he said. Day by day, you just. Eventually staying feels normal. She looked at him. You think I can do that? I know you can. How? Because you already are. The letter from Garrett Hayes arrived 3 weeks later in mid-September. It was long, detailed, written in Hayes's careful script on official federal letterhead. Caleb read it at the kitchen table while Nora cooked dinner. When he finished, he set it down. What does it say? Nora asked. Not turning from the stove. Webb's testimony is comprehensive. He's giving up names, dates, financial records, everything. Caleb picked up the letter again, scanned down to the part that mattered. Hayes says with Webb's cooperation, the case against Aldridge is solid. Trafficking, racketeering, conspiracy, fraud. He's looking at 40 years minimum. Nora's hands stopped moving, just for a second. 40 years, she repeated. Yes, he'll die in prison, yes. She turned around, looked at him. Good, she said. Not with satisfaction, not with vindication, just. Statement of fact. Marcus Aldridge had built his empire on the broken backs of women who couldn't fight back, and now he would spend the rest of his life in a cage. That was justice. Not perfect justice, not enough justice, but justice. There's more, Caleb said. He slid the letter across the table. She picked it up. Read where he'd indicated. Regarding the matter of Russell Webb's fraudulent land certifications and financial documentation related to Broken Creek Ranch, Federal Review has determined that approximately $3,600 of the outstanding debt attributed to Mercer was fabricated through falsified interest calculations and fee assessments. Said amount is hereby nullified. Remaining legitimate debt totals $800. Bank has been notified. Title correction in process. Nora read it twice, then looked up at him. Your ranch, she said. Our ranch, he corrected. You're the one who found the fraud, Caleb. This is. You're going to keep Broken Creek. We're going to keep it, he said. If you're staying. The kitchen went very quiet. Outside, Roy was shouting something to Sammy about the water pump. Danny was laughing at something Pete said. The ordinary sounds of a working ranch carrying on. If I'm staying, Nora repeated slowly. Yes, you want me to stay. I want you to do whatever you want to do, Caleb said carefully. But, yes, I want you to stay. She set the letter down. Looked at him for a long moment. I don't have anywhere else to go, she said finally. That's not why I'm asking, I know. Another long moment. I'm asking because this place is better with you in it, Caleb said. The crew is better. The ranch is better. I'm better, he paused. And because somewhere in the last month I stopped thinking about you as the cook and started thinking about you as someone I don't want to lose. Nora looked at him. And for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. Not a small, careful smile. A real one. Took you long enough, she said. Winter came hard that year. But Broken Creek weathered it. The new barn went up in stages. Roy designed it. Caleb and the crew built it. They started in early January, worked through February. By March, the structure was standing. By April, it was finished. Better than the old barn. Stronger, with proper ventilation and reinforced corners and space for twice the hay storage they'd had before. The whole crew worked on it. Roy, Sammy, Pete, Darnell, Danny, and 6 men from neighboring properties who showed up with tools and no explanation beyond the frontier, understanding that you helped your neighbors rebuild what fire took. Because someday fire came for everyone. Nora fed them all, 3 times a day for 6 weeks. She cooked enough food to feed an army, never ran out once, never complained about the work or the hours, or the fact that her kitchen was now the center of operations for the entire rebuilding effort. She just did it the way she did everything, with quiet competence and no expectation of thanks. On the day they raised the last wall, Roy stood back and looked at it. Better than the old one, he said. Nobody disagreed. That night they had a celebration. Nothing fancy. Just the crew and the neighbors who'd helped, sitting around the table eating Nora's cooking and drinking coffee and talking about nothing important. Caleb sat at the head of the table, watching. Watching Roy laugh at something Sammy said. Watching Danny explain something from a book to Pete, who was listening with genuine interest. Watching Darnell tell a story that had everyone grinning. Watching Nora move through the kitchen refilling cups and setting out more food and looking. Content. Actually content. Like she'd finally stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, after everyone left. After the kitchen was cleaned and the fires banked and the crew gone to bed. Caleb found her standing on the porch, looking out at the dark ranch, at the new barn standing solid against the night sky. He came up beside her. Didn't say anything. Just stood there. After a while she said, I've been thinking. About? About what happens next. What do you mean? She turned to face him. Hayes wrote that I'll need to testify. In St. Louis. Probably this fall. Maybe longer, I know. I'll have to go back there. Face Aldridge in court. Tell everything. In front of lawyers and judges and everyone. Caleb nodded. You will. I don't know if I can do that. You can. How do you know? Because you've already done harder things, he said simply. You survived 2 years on the run. You walked into a failing ranch and saved it. You stood your ground when men with guns came to your door. He paused. Talking in a courtroom is small. Compared to that, she looked at him. Will you come with me to St. Louis? Yes, of course, it might take weeks, the trial, the testimony. All of it, then I'll be there for weeks. What about the ranch? Roy can run it, Caleb said. He's done it before. He'll do it again. Nora was quiet for a moment. Why? She asked finally. Why what? Why would you do that? Close up the ranch, ride to St. Louis. Sit through a trial that has nothing to do with you. Caleb looked at her. At this woman who still, after everything, couldn't quite believe that someone would choose her without needing a reason. Because you're not doing it alone, he said. Because I told you I'd stand with you and I meant it. Because, he stopped, started, again. Because somewhere in the last 4 months you became the most important person in my life. And I'm not letting you walk into that courtroom without someone beside you. Nora stared at him. Caleb, yeah, that's the most you've said at one time since I met you. He almost smiled. Don't get used to it, she laughed. Actual laugh. Soft and surprised and real. And then, before either of them thought too hard about it, he kissed her. Not tentatively, not carefully, just kissed her. The way a man kisses a woman he's been thinking about kissing for months and has finally run out of reasons not to. She kissed him back, and the porch went very quiet, except for the sound of the wind and the distant call of an owl, and 2 people finally admitting what had been obvious to everyone else for weeks. When they stopped, she looked at him. Took you long enough, she said. You keep saying that because it's true. He put his forehead against hers. I'm a slow learner, I noticed. They stood there in the cold. Not moving, not talking, just being together. Finally. Spring came late that year, but when it came full. The land greened up. The cattle thrived. The ranch, for the first time in 6 years, turned a profit. Not a big profit, but profit. Enough to buy supplies. Enough to fix the north fence properly. Enough to hire 2 more hands to help with summer work. Enough to breathe. Nora's garden exploded. She'd been working it since she arrived, turning frozen ground through winter, planting seeds in early spring. By May, it was producing more vegetables than the crew could eat. She started preserving, canning, teaching Danny how to do it because he'd expressed interest. And Nora's response to expressed interest was always yes. The kitchen became a production facility. Jars everywhere. The smell of vinegar and salt and growing things. Roy walked through one afternoon, looked round, shook his head. Woman's building an empire, he said to Caleb. Watching Nora explain something to Danny about proper jar sealing. Said, let her. The trial date was set for October. Hayes wrote with the details, where, when. What Nora would need to prepare. He also wrote that 17 other women had come forward. Survivors of Aldridge's operation. Women who'd been moved through that hotel basement. Who'd seen things. Who'd kept quiet out of fear or shame or the reasonable certainty that no one would believe them. Until Nora Kane stood up. Until federal agents started asking questions. Until the machine that had protected Marcus Aldridge for 30 years finally broke down. Now they were talking, and their testimony, combined with Nora's ledger, combined with Webb's records, combined with physical evidence Hayes' team had recovered from 3 different rail stations. It was overwhelming. Hayes wrote that Aldridge's lawyers were trying to negotiate, trying to reduce charges in exchange for cooperation, but the prosecutors weren't negotiating. Not on this. Nora read the letter sitting at the kitchen table. When she finished, she folded it carefully. 17 women, she said. Caleb, drinking coffee across from her, nodded. Because of you, he said. I didn't do anything. I just ran, and got lucky that I ran to the right place. You did more than run, Caleb said. You kept the ledger. You wrote everything down. You went to the law even when the law had failed you before. You testified. You stood. He set down his coffee. Those 17 women are coming forward because you showed them it was possible. That's not luck. That's courage. She looked at him. I don't feel courageous. Courage never does, he said. It just feels like doing the next right thing, over and over, until you look back and realize you survived. It happened on a Saturday morning in late August. Nothing special about the day, nothing planned. Caleb just decided. He'd been thinking about it for weeks, maybe months, since that night on the porch when he'd kissed her, and she'd kissed him back, and everything had shifted. Since, he'd started thinking about the ranch not as a burden to carry alone but as a life to build together. He found her in the garden. Where else? She was kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds, her hands covered in soil, hair coming loose from the tie she'd used to pull it back. She looked up when his shadow fell across her. Hey, something wrong? No! He stood there for a moment, trying to figure out how to say what he needed to say. Then he gave up, trying to find the right words, because there were no right words. There was just the truth. I want you to stay, he said. She tilted her head. I am staying, not as the cook, not as whatever we've been calling this for the last month. He paused. I want you to stay as my wife. Nora went very still. Your wife, she repeated. Yes, you're asking me to marry you. Yes, she stared at him, in the garden. While I'm covered in dirt, I'm not good at this, he said. I don't have pretty words. Don't have a ring. Don't have anything except this. He gestured around them. At the garden, the ranch, the life they'd built. I want to wake up every day and see you in this kitchen. I want to rebuild this place with you. I want everything. With you, he stopped. That's what I got. That's all I got. Nora looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up, brushed dirt off her hands. Caleb Mercer, she said. Yeah, took you long enough. He blinked. Is that a yes? That's a yes. Just like that. You don't want time to think about it? I've been thinking about it since March, she said. Possibly earlier. Hard to say exactly when. But, yes. The answer is yes. He reached for her. She stepped into his arms, and they stood there in the garden, in the dirt, in the middle of an ordinary Saturday morning, with nothing fancy or planned or perfect about it. Just 2 people who'd found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something new. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Caleb and Nora rode to St. Louis in mid-October, checked into a small hotel 2 blocks from the courthouse. Roy ran the ranch, sent periodic updates via telegraph, cattle fine, barn standing. Danny reading advanced texts now, stop worrying. Stop. Nora testified on the 4th day. Caleb sat in the gallery, watching, She walked to the witness stand like she was walking to her own execution. Pale, composed, terrified, but she didn't run. She sat down, put her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and then she told it. Everything. What she saw, what she heard, what she understood about the codes in the ledger, the roots, the money, the men who came and went through that basement. The women who disappeared. Aldridge's lawyers tried to break her, asked about her employment history, her inconsistent names, her 2 years on the run, tried to paint her as unstable, as unreliable, as a woman with a grudge making up stories about a respected businessman. She didn't break. She answered every question, calmly, clearly. When they asked why she ran instead of going to the police immediately, she looked directly at Marcus Aldridge, who was sitting at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking like a man who'd never broken a sweat in his life. "Because I knew men like you own men like them," she said. "And I was right, the prosecutor didn't object. Neither did the judge. Because it was the truth, and everyone in that courtroom knew it on the 8th day of testimony." After 4 more women had taken the stand, after Webb had spent 6 hours walking the jury through financial documents, after the physical evidence had been entered and examined, Aldridge's lawyers requested a recess. They spent 3 hours in chambers with the judge. When they came out, they announced that Marcus Aldridge would be pleading guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a sentence recommendation. The judge accepted. Marcus Aldridge was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. No parole, no appeals. 40 years. He'd be 93 when he got out. If he lived that long, he didn't look at Nora when the sentence was read. Didn't look at any of the women sitting in the gallery. Just stared straight ahead, face blank. Like he still couldn't quite believe this was happening to him, that the machine that had protected him for 30 years had finally stopped, after the sentencing, after the courtroom cleared, after the lawyers packed their files and left. Nora sat in the empty gallery. Caleb sat beside her. "It's over," he said quietly. She nodded. "It's over. How do you feel?" She thought about it, really thought about it. "Tired," she said finally. "Just so tired. Then let's go home." "Home," she repeated, like she was testing the word. "Yeah," he said. "Home." She looked at him. "No, Broken Creek, that's home now, if you want it to be." "I do," she said. "I really do." They left St. Louis the next morning. Rode back to Broken Creek over 4 days. Didn't talk much. Didn't need to. They'd said everything that needed saying in that courtroom. Now they just needed to get back to the place where they could breathe. They were married on a Thursday afternoon in late November. Nothing fancy, nothing planned. Just the crew. The neighbors who'd helped rebuild the barn. The judge from Caldwell, who Caleb knew from land disputes. Roy stood up with Caleb. Danny stood up with Nora because she'd asked him to, and he'd gone bright red and nodded without being able to speak. They stood in the yard between the house and the new barn. The judge read the words. They repeated them. I do, by the power vested in me. I now pronounce you husband and wife." Caleb kissed her. The crew cheered. Roy clapped him on the shoulder so hard it almost knocked him over. "About damn time," Roy said. They had dinner in the kitchen. Everyone crammed around the table. Food everywhere. Coffee flowing. Stories being told. Sammy stood up halfway through and gave a speech that was half coherent and completely sincere about how Nora had saved this place and everyone in it, and how Caleb was the luckiest man alive. Caleb didn't argue. Because Sammy was right. After dinner, after everyone left, after the kitchen was cleaned, Caleb and Nora stood on the porch, looking out at the dark ranch, at the new barn, at the garden sleeping under frost, at the land that had almost been lost and was now. "There's Mrs. Mercer," Caleb said. Nora smiled. "I'm not sure I'm used to that yet." "You will be. How long did it take you to get used to being married?" "The moment you said yes." She leaned against him. They stood there in the cold, not talking, not needing to, just being together, the way they'd been for months now. Except now it was legal, now it was permanent, now it was everything. The ranch prospered. That was the only word for it. 65 head of cattle, 7 full-time hands, the north pasture fence rebuilt properly, the barn standing strong, the garden producing enough to sell at the market in Caldwell. Caleb and Nora ran it together, not him leading and her following, not her managing and him executing, together, as partners. The way it should have been from the start. Danny finished his education, got a scholarship to study at a school in Kansas City. Left in September with promises to write and visit during holidays. Roy retired that same month. Moved to Colorado to live with his daughter. Before he left, he pulled Caleb aside. "Your father would have hated this," Roy said. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Thanks? I mean it. He would have hated seeing you happy, seeing this place thrive." Seeing you build something with trust instead of walls, Roy paused, which means you did it right. You became everything he couldn't. He clapped Caleb on the shoulder. I'm proud of you, son. For what that's worth, it was worth everything. Caleb didn't cry when Roy left, but it was close. Nora was pregnant by Christmas. They found out on a Tuesday. Doctor in Caldwell confirmed it. She told Caleb that night in the kitchen, while he was going over supply orders, just said it. I'm pregnant. He looked up. You're what? Pregnant, with child, having a baby. However you want to say it. He stared at her. She stared back. Say something, she said. I don't know what to say. How about good? Or, literally, anything? He stood up, crossed to her, put his hands on her face. That's the best thing anyone's ever told me. She smiled. Yeah? You're not scared? Terrified, he admitted. But, good terrified. The kind that means something matters. She kissed him. And in that moment, in that kitchen, in the ranch they'd saved together, Caleb Mercer realized something. That love wasn't weakness. That trust wasn't foolishness. That letting people in didn't destroy you. It saved you. The baby came in June. Healthy, loud, perfect. They named her Grace, not after anyone. Just because that's what she was. Grace, unearned, undeserved, given anyway. The ranch continued. The crew continued. The life they'd built continued. And one evening in late summer, when Grace was 3 months old and sleeping in a basket on the porch, Caleb stood looking out at the fence line, at the land his father had built, the land that had almost been lost, the land that was now truly theirs, free of debt, free of fraud, free of the weight of other men's sins. Nora came up beside him, put Grace in his arms. He looked down at his daughter, at this tiny person who had his chin and Nora's eyes and absolutely no idea what her parents had survived to get here. What are you thinking? Nora asked. I'm thinking that the strongest thing you can build isn't a fence or a barn or an empire. He looked at her. It's a family, a home, a place where people can lay down their weapons and rest. Nora leaned her head on his shoulder. That's what this is. Yes, they stood there on the porch, watching the sun go down over Broken Creek Ranch, over the land, the cattle, the barn, the garden, the life, over everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built, everything they'd become. And Caleb thought about the woman who'd arrived one hot Thursday afternoon with one suitcase, and eyes that had seen the worst the world could offer. The woman who'd looked at a failing ranch and a failing man and decided both were worth saving. The woman who was now his wife, the mother of his child, the person he couldn't imagine life without. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For staying, for fighting, for everything. Nora looked up at him. You saved me first, she said. We saved each other. Yeah, she agreed. We did. Grace made a small sound in her sleep, a contented sound, the sound of a baby who was warm and fed and safe, the sound of a baby who would grow up in a house where love was loud and trust was normal and people stayed, the sound of a baby who would never have to learn, the way her parents had learned, that the world was a place you survived alone, because she wouldn't survive alone. She'd have parents who chose each other every day, who'd fought through fire and fraud and fear to build this life. That's what Broken Creek was now. Not a ranch struggling to survive, but a home learning to thrive. And as the sun set on that June evening, as Grace slept and Nora leaned against him, and the ranch settled into the quiet peace of a good day ending well, Caleb Mercer felt something he'd never felt before. Claimed whole, home, finally. After 42 years of searching, without knowing what he was searching for, he'd found it, in the most unlikely place, with the most unlikely person, through the most unlikely circumstances. But he'd found it. And he was never letting it go. Far off in the distance, thunder rolled, rain coming, good rain, the kind that fed the land and filled the creek and made everything green. Caleb looked at Nora. Should we go inside? In a minute, rain's coming. I know, we'll get wet, I know. But neither of them moved, because some moments were worth getting wet for. Some moments you didn't rush past because you had things to do or places to be. Some moments you just stood in and let yourself feel the weight of everything good that had fought its way into your life, despite all the reasons it shouldn't have. This was one of those moments, so they stood there, together, as a family, while the storm rolled in and the first drops began to fall, and Broken Creek Ranch, once dying, now living, welcomed the rain, the way all good land does, with gratitude, with patience, with the quiet certainty that morning would come, and the work would continue, and the life they'd built together would still be standing, no matter what storms came next, because that's what love does. It stands, it stays, it builds, and it lasts.